of the greatest period of growth in industrial history, really. What happened to the American economic structures between 1860 and, say, 1910 was a marvel for all the world. You know, it was during this period where we got the commercialization of steel. We created new cities with skyscrapers. We had sound recording and photography and flight and electricity, lighting up homes and cities and communication, telephones. It was just the most marvelous period of invention and expansion of incomes, a democratization of prosperity that we saw in America, made America famous all over the world. I mean, in the second half of the 19th century, there was a growing sense in the entire planet Earth that whatever America was doing, they were doing it the right way.
Mm.
And
democratization of prosperity. I love that term.
Well, all the incomes were rising, and across all classes. You know, it's not like the tales that you hear from the Gilded Age, which the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. No, I mean, all the data shows that everybody was growing wealthier systematically. Yes, some more than others, but everybody was better off. And the monetary system we had was free banking at first, and then we had a codified gold standard after the Civil War. And that was a government imposition. The beautiful thing about the gold standard is it restrained congressional spending. There was no ability to print. The existence of physical gold restrained credit expansion. It put money in the hands of the people. Gold and silver circulated among the people. So this was a hard money country, you know, gold coins dangling in your pockets, you know, and banks, if they were issuing notes, which they did, they would keep gold in their vaults, you know, and it was a good system. It was a brilliant system. Remarkably, during this period, between after the gold standard and then all the way up to, say, 1910 or so, what happened to prices? Well, the value of the money gradually grew. I mean, imagine that. You save money, and then after 5 years, you go back to that money that's in your mattress, and you find that it's more valuable than it was when you put it in, right? That's a remarkable thing. We call that deflation now, but at least under the gold standard, it meant that the propensity to save was, even apart from the interest you earn, you would be rewarded for your prudence, for your frugality, right? And so America became a country of frugality and saving. Saving was always rewarded. Prosperity, invention, creation. I mean, it was glorious. It's no wonder, you know, by the 1890s, almost all of European politics said, well, you know, we've tried the aristocracies, we've tried our monarchies, we've tried our kings and queens and multinational big shots running everything in our empires, but let's face it, we're all going to eventually be Americans. Look at what they're doing over there. And so this experience really did inspire the entire planet Earth, and America was never more confident than it was under the gold standard in those years. It was also in those years that we developed all of our civic pride, stories of the founding fathers, our national holidays, the music that we associated, the marches, and the flags and the signs and symbols. American pride, and you could say even patriotism, was born during this period, and for good reason. And I guess my point is that this is all very interesting, but that the monetary regime being hard money belonging to and controlled by the people and by independent enterprises was a major reason for that. So now we have to fast forward to the Fed, because that's where things really began to change.
And so, you know, now we're talking about 1913. And so what, just very briefly, why?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the Panic of 1907. But like in all politics, sometimes the crisis is exaggerated for a reason. But there was something like a frenzy after 1907. We can't stand this system anymore. Ups and downs, and bank failures and panics, and oh, we don't know if the money is there. This is a problem. We don't know if the debt holders are even going to be paid. We need to bring science to monetary policy. So one of the things that was part of the ethos of the time, you could look at the prosperity that unfolded over those 30 or 40 years and say, that's a miracle of entrepreneurship, enterprise, and freedom. Or you could look at that and say, wow, this is a consequence of good managers, excellent engineers, excellent science, the primacy of rationality over randomness, right? There's two interpretations you could give. So as time went on, that second interpretation prevailed. So there's a growing sort of valorization of expertise and management. And they said, look, we should bring this spirit that's given us all these great inventions in the private sector to government itself. Let's put the experts to work on banking and money. And the experts did come together, famously at Jekyll Island, and put together this new institution. It's a funny institution with a funny name because it's actually not a national bank. Yes, it is a national bank, but it was more than that. It became a kind of regulatory cartel owner of all banks in the country. So you could not be a bank unless you were a member of the Federal Reserve. Federal Reserve was going to be responsible for all clearing systems. How we got paid, when you finally get the thing that you're going for, when the money arrives at the institution that it's intended for, that's called clearing, and that was going to be entirely charged by the Fed. That was entirely managed by the Fed. And so there wasn't going to be no more wildcat banking, no more independent banking. Banks were not going to be this free enterprise operations where this pop up and go away. No, it's all going to be controlled by the Fed. So it was both a national bank and a private banking cartel, granted special rights by the federal government. So it exists in this strange place, and that was in 1913.
How is it private?
Well, it's entirely privately owned. I mean, these are privately owned banks. They're privately owned banks with a federal charter from the government.
The banks being all the members?
Yeah, well, all the banks are privately owned. And,
sure.
Yeah, and so it's a private cartel. It's like the biggest banks, leaned on Congress to codify a centralized system that would retain their private status while forbidding competition from outsiders, from wildcat banks and random people. So the system itself is is privately owned, or you could say it's a quasi-public, public-private. I don't know what to compare it to. I'm not sure there's a good comparison there.
Well, clearly the Board of Governors is not private.
Right, that's right. So, and this is where we get into a lot of ambiguity. So this is where it gets really interesting. Is it public or is it private? This is where, and if it is public, who controls it? The voters? Congress? Supreme Court? The president? Who? And what does it mean to be an independent agency? We know from the Supreme Court that these don't really exist in other areas of the federal bureaucracy. We know now that the president's in charge of them. Well, what about the Fed? But that was always ambiguous in the law. So what happened was, this is the way it's normally described. Congress decided, in its wisdom, to take its powers over monetary matters, Article 1, Section 8, and delegate those to this new institution called the Federal Reserve. Now, you should just reflect for just 2 seconds. You and I are both interested in words. The word Federal Reserve is by itself funny because it doesn't say central bank. Americans hated the idea of a central bank because that was more like Germany and Bismarck or whatever. They didn't want that. But central bank is not an American institution, so they called it something completely different. It's actually kind of genius. They called it first the word federal. Federal meaning decentralized, consistent with the 10th Amendment. We're these United States, where we don't have a central government. We have a federal system where we, and so to accomplish that federal piece, the new central bank had branches. There's a Minneapolis Fed, an Atlanta Fed, a Dallas Fed, Chicago Fed, San Francisco Fed. So there's many Federal Reserve banks around the country for no apparent reason, really, except to create the illusion of decentralization. Okay, so there was that. And even now they're gigantic and they employ all these researchers. And they say interesting things. But there's no reason for all these feds around the country. The second part, this word reserve, is funny when you think about it, because it implies that they have something. They're in the possession. We have the reserves. Just in case we need them, we have the reserves. If there's a crisis, we're going to be there to help you. You can have confidence in the system because we have reserves. Whatever. In those days, it was gold. Yeah. You don't need to worry. Finally, we have a system that's stable and functioning and scientific. Now, the science part of this thing is also interesting because it comes along at the same time that macroeconomic theory was sort of developing. And the idea was that the Fed eventually, not initially, but eventually, the Fed would guarantee, would seek low inflation and high employment, or at least low unemployment, and some sort of economic stability. So they had this sort of mission, a big, broad mission, managerial mission over the whole country. The original Fed, keep in mind, so the founders of the Fed and the ethos of the time was they're tired of the chaos. They're tired of the chaos of the markets. They're tired of the bank failures. We're going to stop that, but we're also going to guarantee low inflation. I mean, this is widely believed. Now, there's plenty of people out there that think the Fed is just a big demonic conspiracy, racketeers. Maybe there's an element of that or whatever. But what I see in the founding of the Fed is as a sincere, an authentic desire to stabilize the system, bring intelligence, rationality, managerial prowess, and expertise to a sector of society that had long been subject to waves of chaos. I think they had every intention of doing good work. The founders of the Fed weren't bad guys. Many of them wanted sound money. In fact, some of them wanted to stop the credit expansion. They didn't like the way these wildcat banks, you'd have a bank pop up, Bob's Bank. Oh, the railroad's coming along, here's your money, it'll lend the money, I'll collect the money, and then the bank goes belly up and people lose their deposits, And then the bandits would be on the run. They didn't like that. They were kind of stodgy old timers in a way. Let's have gold and a frugal, thrifty middle class and stop with all this nonsense, right? So this was the sort of the ethos of the first Federal Reserve. But the problem is that in the end, despite its name, despite the intentions of the founders, it was a central bank.
And if I may just